Pretend to be my wife, he said, his voice calm, deliberate, and utterly serious. For a moment I thought I had misheard him. The hospital corridor outside was silent, the soft hum of machines the only sound between us. Dr. Adrian Cole, the man everyone in St. John's Medical Center called a legend, stood in front of me. With the same composure he used to command an operating room. His gaze didn't waver, and neither did his tone. 1 week, that's all I'm asking. And one rule, no feelings involved. I blinked my mind, struggling to catch up. I was still wearing my scrubs, my badge, crooked my shoes squeaking slightly against the tile floor. I had just finished a 12-hour night shift. My brain was fried, my body ached, and now the hospital's most respected neurosurgeon was asking me to be his wife. Fake wife, apparently, for reasons I couldn't even begin to imagine. I'm sorry what I managed. He didn't flinch. You heard me, Nurse Rivers. I need your help. The rest of the world blurred for a moment. The monitors down the hall beeped faintly, a reminder that life moved on, even when yours suddenly tilted on its axis. I swallowed hard. This is a joke, right? He shook his head once the faintest movement, but his eyes stayed on mine. Not a joke. A proposal. Rain tapped against the window behind him, streaking the glass with silver threads. The lamp on his desk threw a soft circle of light enough to make the shadows under his eyes look deeper. He was tired, I could see that, but in control as always. He never raised his voice, never rushed, never stumbled. People whispered that he was made of steel. I wasn't sure what I was made of anymore. By the time I left his office, my heart was still pounding. His words looped in my head like a haunting echo. Pretend to be my wife. Outside Boston was drenched in rain. I pulled my jacket tighter around me as I crossed the hospital parking lot. The city lights shimmered through puddles, blurred and distant. My phone buzzed. A message from the hospital billing department, final notice. Payment due within 48 hours. I stood there under the flickering light, my breath fogging in the cold air. I thought about my mother lying in her small apartment in Dorchester, her hands trembling every time she tried to hold a spoon. The medication wasn't helping anymore. Her doctor said she needed surgery soon, $62,000 soon. I had been saving for 2 years. I barely had 5. By the time I got home, my clothes were soaked. The apartment smelled faintly of detergent and old coffee. My mother was asleep on the couch, her gray hair spread over the pillow like a halo. I covered her with a blanket, brushing a strand away from her face. She stirred and murmured my name. Sleep, Mom, I whispered. It's okay. But it wasn't okay. Not even close. I sat by the kitchen table, staring at the stack of unpaid invoices. Medical bills, rent, utilities, the weight of them all pressed down like wet sand. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Maya Rivers, I answered. It's Adrian Cole, came the steady, unmistakable voice on the other end. My pulse jumped. How did you get your file lists your emergency contact? I took the liberty. That's not exactly standard procedure, doctor. I'm aware. But I thought you might need more time to decide. About your offer, I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Yes. He paused. And the rule still stands. A bitter laugh escaped me. You're unbelievable. Perhaps, he said. But I'm also offering a solution. You help me for 1 week and I'll make sure your mother's surgery is covered in full. You'll walk away debt-free. I stared at the rain sliding down the kitchen window, the sound of it filling the silence between us. It was madness, every part of it. But there was something in his voice, something that wasn't arrogance. It was quiet, steady, almost weary. What's in it for you? I asked. The hospital board meets next week to appoint the new head of the foundation. The chair must appear. Stable. His tone softened. I can't let my mother's legacy die because I'm alone. For a long time I didn't speak. My eyes landed on a photo of Mom and me at the harbor. Her smile bright even when her hands already trembled. She had spent her life teaching me to fight to survive, to never owe anyone anything. But this wasn't survival anymore. It was desperation. Why me? I asked finally. Because you're honest, he said simply, and because you have nothing to gain by lying. I exhaled slowly, and if I say no, then nothing changes, except the part where you lose more than you should. The line went quiet. When I hung up, my hands were trembling. I turned off the kitchen light, but the city outside kept glowing faintly, as if waiting for me to move. On the table lay the envelope he'd sent earlier that day, sealed white, perfectly neat. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the contract, and beneath it a handwritten note in dark ink. "When you're ready, just sign." I stared at it for a long time, the ink blurring slightly as a drop of water fell from my hair. By morning, I still hadn't slept. The rain had stopped, but its smell lingered in the air. When I left for my next shift, I slipped the envelope into my bag, not because I had made a decision, but because deep down I already had. The townhouse on Beacon Hill was nothing like I had imagined. From the outside it looked old, but dignified red brick tall windows and a black iron gate that whispered money without trying too hard. I hesitated on the steps, rain still dripping from the edge of my umbrella, before pressing the doorbell. A man in a dark suit opened it almost instantly. "Ms. Rivers, Dr. Cole is expecting you," he said, stepping aside. I nodded, my throat dry, and followed him through a hallway lined with family portraits and bookshelves that seemed untouched by dust or time. The air smelled faintly of cedar and something sterile like the hospital, only richer. Dr. Adrian Cole stood by the fireplace when I entered the living room, still in his navy scrubs, sleeves rolled up, a file in his hand. He looked up as if I were the next patient he had to assess, not the woman he'd just offered to marry. "You came," he said simply. "I shouldn't have," I replied, setting my bag down. "But you did." I didn't answer. He gestured toward the armchair opposite him, and I sat. The folder between us waited like a quiet promise. "This is the agreement," he said, opening it. "Read carefully." I took the paper, scanning the lines of neat legal print. The terms were coldly specific: 1 week appearances at 3 public events, 1 press conference, and 1 photo shoot. In exchange, the Cole Neurological Foundation would sponsor full coverage for the medical expenses of Mrs. Annette Rivers, patient ID 43591. My throat tightened when I saw my mother's name. "There's a section on confidentiality," he continued. "Everything must remain private. This arrangement ends the moment the week does." I flipped another page, and there it was, in bold, rule number 1, no feelings involved. I looked up. "You really had to write that down." He didn't flinch. "I believe in clarity, or control," I said quietly. His gaze met mine steady. "Both." I sighed, leaning back. "Why me, really? There must be dozens of people who'd kill for the chance to play your wife for a week." "That's exactly why I didn't ask them," he said. "They'd want something in return." "You don't." I scoffed. "You think helping my mother isn't something?" He hesitated. For a moment something flickered behind his calm exterior, something almost human. "You're doing it for her, not for yourself. That matters." The words hit harder than I expected. I folded the papers and set them on the table. "And what about you? What's your rule?" He looked down at the pen in his hand. "After my mother died, I promised myself emotions would never interfere again. They destroy focus. They cost lives." "Sounds lonely," I said. "Sounds necessary," he corrected. For a long time we sat in silence, the crackle of the fireplace filling the space between us. Finally he slid the pen across the table. "You don't have to decide now." I didn't move. The paper blurred before my eyes, not from tears, but exhaustion. Everything inside me screamed that this was insane, unethical, maybe even humiliating. But there was also the image of my mother, fragile and waiting, and the bills who was almost stacked on my kitchen table. My hand moved before my mind caught up. I signed. Adrian didn't smile. He simply nodded once, folded the papers neatly, and placed them back in the folder. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You make it sound like I just agreed to surgery," I muttered. "In a way, you did." The assistant appeared again at the doorway. "Will you be needing anything else, doctor?" "Not tonight," Adrian said, his tone distant again. "Prepare the documents for the foundation's records. Ms. Rivers will be joining me at tomorrow's board luncheon." The man nodded and disappeared. I stood, suddenly restless. "You already had this plan, didn't you?" "I like efficiency," he said. "Of course you do." As I turned to leave, he spoke again, softer this time. "Maya." It was the first time he'd said my name. I froze. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "After this is over, you'll never have to see me again. Just follow the rule." "No feelings," I repeated, forcing a thin smile. "I think I can manage that." But when I stepped out into the night, the air felt heavier. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and shining under the streetlights. My reflection in the car window looked like someone I barely recognized, someone about to step into a lie too big to control. I took the long way home, walking instead of taking a cab. The city was quiet, the kind of quiet that let you hear your own heartbeat. I thought about what he'd said about clarity, about control, and wondered if that was how he survived. By locking everything human away behind rules and logic. When I reached my apartment, my mother was awake, half asleep on the couch, the TV humming low. "You're soaked again," she murmured. "I'm fine, Mom," I said, kneeling beside her. I tucked the blanket around her shoulders and brushed her hair back. "Did something happen at work, something?" I whispered. "Nothing bad." She smiled faintly. "You sound like your father when you lie." That made me laugh softly. "Then I need to get better at it." She drifted off it again, her breathing steady. I sat there in the dim light, watching her chest rise and fall, and thought about the man who lived by rules so strict they left no room for warmth. On the table beside me, my phone buzzed once. A new message. "Adrian Cole, driver, will pick you up at 11:30 tomorrow. Dress formal, and remember the rule." I stared at the screen for a long time before locking it again. The glow faded, leaving only my reflection staring back, tired, unsure, and a little bit scared. Somewhere between desperation and reason, I just agreed to become someone's wife. And the worst part wasn't the lie. It was the faint, dangerous curiosity blooming inside me about the man who'd asked for it. The hotel ballroom shimmered beneath 1,000 glass chandeliers. My reflection flashed back at me from every direction. Polished floors, mirrored pillars, even the silver of the champagne trays passing by. I had never been anywhere like this. The gown Adrian's assistant had chosen for me clung perfectly, a soft shade of blue that made me feel both exposed and disguised at once. My heels pinched with every step, but I forced a steady smile as cameras began to turn our way. Adrian offered his arm like a man who'd done this 1,000 times. "Ready as I'll ever be," I murmured. He leaned closer. "Smile when they call your name. It helps them believe." The flashbulb started the moment we entered the room. People turned, whispering. The whispers weren't kind, but they were curious, and curiosity was what he wanted. I could hear the murmur ripple through the crowd like static. "That's her," someone said. "The new Mrs. Cole." We reached the stage where the Cole Neurological Foundation banner hung behind a long table of board members. I felt every eye track my movement as Adrian guided me into the seat beside him. His hand brushed mine under the table, steadying me like an anchor. Dr. Nathan Linton, seated across from us, smiled thinly. "So this is the wife you've kept hidden from us, Adrian?" Adrian's tone was light practice. "We value privacy. I'm sure you understand." Linton's gaze flicked toward me, sharp and assessing. "Of course, a nurse, correct? From your hospital." The words sliced cleaner than any scalpel. I managed a polite smile. "Yes, from St. John's." "Ah," he said, swirling his wine. "How romantic." Adrian's hand tightened on mine under the table. I kept my smile fixed, but my throat burned. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of laughter, toasts, and polite cruelty. I nodded through conversations I didn't understand, laughed when appropriate, and pretended the champagne didn't sting. Halfway through, one of the donors asked, "So, Mrs. Cole, how did you two meet?" I froze, but Adrian answered smoothly. "In the emergency room. She saved a patient I almost lost." Laughter rose around the table. "So she saved you too," someone joked. He smiled faintly. "Something like that." It was strange hearing him spin a story out of nothing, and stranger still how natural he sounded doing it. When dessert was served, I escaped to the balcony for air. The night outside was crisp, the city lights trembling in the harbor below. I pressed my hands to the railing, breathing slowly, reminding myself this wasn't real. Just 7 days. 7 days and my mother's surgery would be paid. Running away, already I turned. Adrian stood in the doorway, his bow tie, loosened hair slightly disheveled. He looked less like a doctor, more like a man who'd been carrying too much weight for too long. "I just needed air," I said. He joined me at the railing, silent for a moment. "You did well in there." "Did I?" He glanced at me. "You looked like you belonged." "That's funny," I said softly, "because I've never felt more out of place." His expression softened. "They'll get used to you, or they'll eat me alive." He gave a small, tired laugh, maybe both. For a while we stood in silence. Below us the river glimmered under the moonlight. Then he spoke again, quieter. "You didn't have to do this, you know." "Yes, I did," I said. "You made it very clear what was at stake for both of us." His eyes searched mine, something unreadable flickering behind them. "It's not just about the board. There's more history in that room than you realize." "Like Dr. Linton?" I asked. "He seems fond of you." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Linton's been after my position for years. My mother trusted him once. That was her mistake." There was something in the way he said it, a shadow that hinted at more than rivalry. I wanted to ask, but he turned away before I could. "We should go back in," he said. "Adrian," I started, but he was already walking toward the door. Back inside, speeches began. Linton took the microphone first, praising the foundation's growth and the spirit of family values that guided its leadership. His smile lingered a second too long on me. When Adrian's turn came, his words were simple, elegant, precise. Yet when he mentioned his late mother, his voice caught for the briefest second before he recovered. The applause that followed was loud, but he didn't smile. He only glanced at me, and for that heartbeat, the room faded, the crowd, the cameras, the whispers. It was just him and me, two strangers pretending to be something they weren't. Later, as the event ended and guests began leaving, a photographer stopped us near the exit. "Just one more, Dr. Cole. With your wife." Adrian hesitated, then nodded. He stepped closer, his arm sliding around my waist with effortless grace. The flash went off. "Perfect," the photographer said. But as the light faded, I felt his hand linger a moment too long. His breath closed enough for me to catch the faint scent of his cologne cedar and rain. When he finally stepped back, his composure had returned. "Good night, Mrs. Cole," he said, offering a faint, ironic smile before heading toward the car. On the ride home, neither of us spoke. The city passed in streaks of light outside the window. I caught our reflections in the glass, him staring straight ahead, me looking at him, wondering what secrets he was keeping. At my apartment, he didn't wait for the driver to open my door. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low. "Tomorrow there's a press luncheon, 11 sharp. My assistant will send details." I nodded, fingers tightening around my clutch. "Maya," he said before I stepped out. "Yes, don't let them see when they get to you." For a second, I almost asked if he meant the reporters or his colleagues, but his tone told me it didn't matter. They were all the same to him, people to manage, to outlast, to survive. As the car pulled away, I looked up at the night sky still heavy with clouds from the storm. Somewhere between the noise and the silence, I realized something unsettling. The more I played my part, the more I began to understand his, and that frightened me most of all. The first headline appeared 2 days later, "The Doctor's Secret Bride." It was printed on glossy paper beside a photo of us smiling at the gala, his hand on the small of my back. The hospital staff had passed it around by lunchtime. When I walked through the corridors of St. John's that afternoon, the whispers followed me like a shadow. "She really married him," someone murmured. "Or did he buy her?" I kept my head down, pretending I didn't hear. I focused on the steady rhythm of my footsteps and the soft beep of monitors that usually soothed me. But today, every sound seemed too loud, too sharp. When I entered the break room, 2 nurses stopped talking instantly. One of them forced a smile. "Hey, Mrs. Cole." The title made my stomach twist. "Just Maya," I said, but it didn't matter. The room was already filled with unspoken judgment. By the time my shift ended, I couldn't breathe. I left the hospital through the back door, stepping into the cold night. The city smelled of wet pavement and exhaust. My phone buzzed a message from Adrian's assistant Clara. "Clara Press, dinner moved to 8 p.m. at the Harbor Club. Dress formal. Doctor will pick you up." I almost didn't go, but that wasn't an option. At 8 sharp, a black sedan stopped outside my apartment. Adrian was already inside, crisp in a charcoal suit, looking every inch the man the world believed him to be. He glanced up from his phone when I got in. "You look tired," he said. "I've been busy defending my fake marriage," I replied. His jaw tightened slightly. "Ignore them. That's easy for you to say. They're not calling you a gold digger." His gaze flicked toward me, steady and unreadable. "They'll stop eventually. And if they don't..." He looked out the window. Then we let them talk. The car glided through the city toward the harbor. Outside, the water shimmered under the streetlights, restless and cold. When we arrived, the Harbor Club buzzed with the murmur of reporters and donors. Adrian placed a hand on my back as we entered, the gesture smooth, protective, practiced. Inside the tables gleamed with crystal glasses and silver cutlery. Cameras flashed as we walked by. Someone called his name. He smiled politely. I played my role, the supportive wife, graceful but quiet. When we reached our table, Adrian's expression shifted. Across from us sat Dr. Linton. He was already halfway through a glass of wine, his smirk curling like smoke. "Adrian," he said, raising his glass. "And the lovely Mrs. Cole. What a surprise." Adrian nodded curtly. "Nathan." "I must say," Linton continued, "the papers didn't do you justice, my dear. You photograph well, but in person." "That's enough," Adrian said quietly. Linton's smirk widened. "Touchy, are we? Relax, old friend. I only meant that you've outdone yourself this time." I wanted to leave, but Adrian leaned closer to me, whispering so only I could hear, "Smile. He feeds on reaction." So I smiled. The kind of smile that didn't reach my eyes. Dinner stretched painfully long. I answered polite questions, deflected crueler ones, and held my composure while Linton's remarks grew sharper. Adrian remained calm, though I could sense tension beneath the surface. When the event finally ended, I slipped away to the restroom just to breathe. The cool air inside the marble room steadied me. I stared at my reflection, perfect hair, flawless makeup, borrowed jewelry. I didn't look like a nurse from Dorchester anymore. I looked like someone else entirely, someone unreal. As I turned to leave, 2 women entered, their voices echoing. I heard she was a nurse. Can you believe it? Maybe he's trying to fix his image. Poor thing, probably thinks he loves her. Their laughter followed me out the door. By the time I reached the car, my throat burned. Adrian was waiting by the curb, his expression unreadable. He opened the door for me, his voice low. "You handled it well." "I handled being humiliated," I said, sliding into the seat. "You didn't give them what they wanted." Which is a reaction. The car moved through the dark streets, headlights slicing the mist. We didn't speak for a while. Then he said quietly, "You'll have to get used to it." "Used to what?" "The noise, the attention. It comes with the image." I laughed bitterly. "Easy for you. You built this image." He turned toward me, his voice steady. "You think I enjoy it? Every smile, every headline, every rumor, it's armor. You wear it long enough, you start to forget what's underneath." I looked at him, then, really looked. The faint lines near his eyes, the exhaustion he hid so well. For the first time, he didn't seem untouchable. He seemed lonely. When we reached his townhouse, he didn't move to get out. Instead, he sat there for a moment, watching the rain slide down the windshield. "Come in," he said finally. "Just for a drink. You look like you need it." I followed him inside. The house was quiet, dimly lit. He poured 2 glasses of wine, handing me one before sitting at the piano in the corner. "You play?" I asked. "Not anymore," he said. "She used to. Your mother." He nodded. "She said music made her feel human." I never understood that. I walked closer. "Maybe because you never let yourself feel anything." He didn't answer. Instead, he pressed a single key. The note hung in the air, soft, haunting. "Go ahead," he said, gesturing for me to sit beside him. I hesitated, then did. My fingers brushed the keys, uncertain. I played a simple tune I remembered from childhood, slow and quiet. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. When I stopped, he said softly, "Thank you." "For what?" "For making this place sound alive again." The words caught me off guard. I stood, quickly setting the glass down. "I should go." He rose too, his voice gentler now. "Maya, don't let them make you doubt who you are." I met his eyes. "Then maybe you should stop hiding who you are." We stood there, the distance between us thick with something unspoken. Then I turned and walked out before it could become anything more. Outside, the rain had started again, cold and relentless. I pulled my coat tight, my heart pounding. The city lights blurred through the drops like melting stars. And for the first time, I wondered if the biggest lie in this arrangement wasn't the marriage at all, but the rule that was supposed to protect us. The emergency call came in just after dawn. I was halfway through my coffee in the nurse's lounge when the pager on my belt shrieked to life. Code blue, pediatrics, operating room 3. My cup hit the table before I realized I dropped it. I ran. The hallway blurred as I sprinted through it, sneakers slapping the linoleum, adrenaline flooding my veins. When I burst through the OR doors, I saw him, Adrian, already at the table, masks and gloved eyes, locked on the small, limp body beneath the bright surgical lights. 6-year-old seizure after a head injury. A nurse shouted over the noise. Craniotomy set. We're losing him, Adrian said, voice sharp but steady. He didn't even look up as I took my place beside him. I didn't think I just moved, adjusting monitors, suctioning, handing instruments. For the next 4 hours, the world shrank to the size of that operating table. Every breath, every pulse, every heartbeat mattered. When the monitor finally steadied, beep, 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 the sound filled the room like a miracle. Adrian stepped back, exhaling hard. His gloves were splattered with blood, his eyes shadowed but alive. He looked at me through the mask. Good work, he said quietly. I felt the tremor in my knees only after we stepped into the hallway. He leaned against the wall, pulling off his gloves. His hair was damp with sweat, his voice low. If my mother were here, she'd say, "You have a surgeon's soul." I smiled weakly. "I think I'll stick to nursing." "She would have liked you," he said. The words hit something deep inside me, something I didn't want to name. We stood there for a moment, both of us caught in the quiet hum of the recovery wing. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and turned it face down. "You should rest," he said. "I'll brief the family," but I didn't move. "Adrian," he looked up. "Do you ever get tired of saving everyone except yourself?" His jaw tightened. "This isn't about me. Maybe it should be," I whispered. He didn't answer. When I left the hospital that afternoon, the world outside felt too bright. The sun bounced off the glass towers, the streets buzzed with weekend noise. My phone was full of unread messages, but one headline caught my eye. The doctor and his muse inside Boston's favorite power couple. The photo showed us standing in the pediatric wing, his hand on my shoulder as we watched the child's family embrace. I hadn't even realized a camera was there. By the time I reached my apartment, the story had spread everywhere. I sat on the couch staring at the screen, heart pounding. The article called me the woman who brought warmth to Dr. Cole's world. They called us Boston's golden couple. My mother was reading the same story from her phone. "You look beautiful in that picture," she said, smiling. "Mom, it's not what you think." She reached for my hand. "Maybe not, but I've never seen you look so alive." I didn't know what to say. That night, Adrian called. "They're calling it the miracle case," he said. The boards thrilled. The foundation got 3 new donors in one afternoon. "So your rule is paying off," I said flatly. He hesitated. "Are you angry?" "I'm tired," I replied. "Tired of pretending it's all under control." "Maya," he said softly, "this will all pass. You just have to trust me." "I trusted you the minute I signed that contract," I said. Maybe that was my mistake. There was silence on the line. Then quietly, "Tomorrow night there's a dinner with the board. We'll need to go together." "Of course," I said, even though I didn't want to. When I hung up, I stared at the ceiling for a long time. Somewhere between his voice and the echo of that hospital hallway, something inside me began to shift. The next evening, the dinner felt different. People congratulated him, toasted his brilliance, praised the doctor who could do no wrong. Every time someone mentioned me, it was as an accessory to his success, a pretty face, beside the miracle man. I smiled through it all, but my chest burned. At one point, when he turned to answer a question, I caught sight of his reflection in the wineglass, calm, composed, untouchable. Except I knew better now. I'd seen the crack. After dinner, he walked me to the car. "You handled yourself well," he said. "I handled being invisible." He frowned. "You weren't invisible. I was decoration." His expression tightened. "This isn't personal, Maya." "Then what is it?" He looked away. "Necessary." Something in me snapped. "You keep using that word like it excuses everything. Is that what you told yourself when you made that rule? That feelings are inconvenient, unnecessary?" His gaze met mine, sharp, pained. "You agreed to the rule. I didn't agree to lose myself in it." The air between us pulsed, charged with something too heavy to name. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, he said quietly, "This was supposed to make things easier." I stepped closer, my voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe easy isn't the same as right." He didn't answer. When the car door closed behind me, I could still feel his eyes on me. The ride home was silent, the city lights stretching into a blur outside the window. Somewhere along the line, the lie we had built together had started to feel real, and that was the most dangerous truth of all. The storm rolled in just after midnight, thunder echoing over the harbor as rain lashed against the hospital windows. I was still charting vitals when the message arrived: board meeting. 8 a.m., urgent. The sender was Darlinton. No context, no courtesy, just authority. By morning, the entire hospital buzzed with tension. Rumors drifted like static, something about the foundation, the marriage, a breach of ethics. I found Adrian in his office, his desk already stacked with reports. He looked up briefly, then back at the papers. "Is this about us?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. "The board's restless," he said, finally. "Linton's been pushing for a full review of the foundation's leadership. Because of the photo, because of you." The words hit like a slap. "I thought you said this would fade." He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I underestimated him. He's using our marriage as leverage to get your seat." He nodded once. "He's wanted it for years." A long silence stretched between us, broken only by the ticking clock. Finally I asked, "Is there something else I should know?" He hesitated, which was answer enough. "Maya." "This isn't the first time Linton's gone after me. What does that mean?" But before he could reply, the door opened and Clara stepped in, clutching a tablet. "Doctor, you need to see this." She turned the screen toward him. It was an article from a local news blog, half rumor, half accusation. Sources suggest Dr. Adrian Cole's marriage to a hospital nurse may be a cover-up for a decade-old malpractice case. My blood ran cold. What case? Adrian's jaw clenched. "It's nothing. Old history." I took the tablet from Clara's hands, scanning the text. My father's name was there in black and white. William Rivers, a construction worker, died in 2012 during a neurological procedure led by then-resident Dr. Adrian Cole. The room tilted. "That's my father," I whispered. Adrian's face went pale. "Maya, you knew." My voice broke. "You knew and you still asked me to marry you." "I didn't know when I asked," he said quickly. "Not until after the gala. When Linton started digging, I realized the connection. And you decided not to tell me I was protecting you. From what? Your guilt?" He stepped forward, his voice raw. "From a man who's willing to destroy anyone to get what he wants. Linton falsified the report that blamed me. I was 25, a resident. He made sure the hospital covered it up to protect the board." I stared at him, my pulse roaring in my ears. "And my father," he looked down. "He never should have died." For a moment I couldn't breathe. Every word, every glance, every rule we'd built this arrangement on suddenly felt poisoned. "I can't do this," I said, backing toward the door. "Maya, please." But I was already gone. Outside, the rain had turned the parking lot into a mirror of gray light. I walked without direction, the sound of thunder drowning everything. By the time I reached my apartment, I was shaking. I ripped off the necklace I'd worn to every foundation event and threw it onto the table. The rule the no feelings involved had been a lie from the start. I didn't sleep that night. At 2 a.m., I called Clara. "I need a favor," I said. Her voice was cautious. "What kind of favor?" "The truth. About the 2012 report." There was a pause. "You're not going to like it." "I already don't." Half an hour later, Clara showed up at my door, rain dripping from her coat. She handed me a flash drive. "This is from the hospital's old data archives. You didn't get it from me." When she left, I plugged it into my laptop, the screen filled with scanned documents, emails, medical notes, signatures. One thread caught my eye, an internal exchange between Linton and the board chair. "We'll need to alter the file. Cole will take the fall if it leaks." My heart pounded. It was their proof that my father's death had been manipulated, that Linton had buried the truth. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. All this time I'd believed Adrian was the villain, but he had been a pawn just like my father. By dawn, I was back at the hospital. The corridors were quiet, the world still half asleep. I found Adrian alone in the cafeteria, a cup of untouched coffee in front of him. His tie was loosened, his expression hollow. "You were right," I said softly. He looked up, weary. "About what, Linton?" I set the printed emails on the table. "He framed you." He scanned the papers, his breath catching. "Where did you get these?" Clara helped. "You need to show them to the board." He shook his head. "They won't listen. They'll think it's fabricated. then leak it to the press. That would drag you into it, he said. They'll say you conspired with me. I don't care anymore, I said. I care about the truth. He stared at me for a long moment, then closed the folder gently. You shouldn't have to fix what I broke. You didn't break it, I said. They did. We just lived with the pieces. The rain outside slowed to a drizzle soft against the windows. He leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face. You shouldn't even be here. Maybe not, I said. But I am. He looked up at me then, and for the first time since I met him, the mask dropped. There was no control, no composure, just a man carrying too many ghosts. Whatever happens next, he said, voice barely above a whisper, don't forget the rule. I smiled faintly, though my chest ached. I think that rule stopped mattering a long time ago. We sat there in silence, two people bound by a lie that had turned into something painfully real. And outside, as the first light broke through the clouds, I realized the storm wasn't ending. It was only changing shape. The hospital conference room was filled with the kind of silence that could cut through steel. The board members sat in a half circle, their faces a blur of stern lines and polished glasses. Cameras weren't allowed, but the tension felt public all the same. Adrian stood at the front, every inch the composed surgeon, even as I could see the tremor in his hand when he straightened the papers on the lectern. Dr. Linton sat across from him, perfectly calm, a faint smirk ghosting his lips. Before we begin, he said, I'd like to remind everyone that this isn't personal. It's about the integrity of this hospital and the foundation we represent. I almost laughed. Integrity. That word had lost its meaning the moment he forged those emails. Adrian didn't respond. He just began to speak, his tone even almost detached. The past few weeks have brought questions about my position in my marriage. I take full responsibility for the misunderstanding. The marriage began as a personal arrangement, but it has not compromised my professional conduct. Whispers rippled through the room. Linton leaned back, pretending to look bored. Adrian continued. However, new information has come to light regarding an incident from 2012, an incident involving the late William Rivers. At the mention of my father's name, my chest tightened. Linton's smirk faltered for half a second. I have documentation proving that the surgical report from that night was altered without my consent, Adrian said. The changes were made to conceal administrative negligence, not medical error. I have the emails to prove it. He handed the folder to the chairman, who glanced through the pages frowning. Linton's voice sliced through the air. This is absurd. Those documents could have been fabricated by anyone, perhaps even by your wife. All eyes turned toward me. I stood slowly. My palms were sweating, but my voice didn't shake. Those emails were pulled from the hospital's own server archives. Your personal login was used to send them, Dr. Linton. Would you like me to read the timestamps aloud? The chairman looked up sharply. Is that true? Linton's confidence faltered, his mouth tightening. This is a setup, he said. She's lying. Adrian's voice cut through the chaos, low, firm, and final. She's telling the truth. For a moment no one moved. Then the chairman cleared his throat. We'll verify the files immediately. Until then, both parties will be temporarily suspended from board activity pending investigation. Linton protested, but it was useless. The decision was made. When the meeting ended, reporters were already waiting outside. I followed Adrian through the corridor as cameras flashed and voices shouted questions about the foundation, about the scandal about us. He didn't respond to a single one. He just kept walking, his shoulders straight, his face unreadable. In the parking lot, he finally stopped, turning to face me. You shouldn't have spoken up like that, he said quietly. I wasn't going to let him destroy you, I replied. He looked at me for a long moment, then said softly, You didn't just save me. You burned every bridge you had left here. Maybe they weren't worth keeping, I said. The rain had started again, soft and steady. It fell between us like static. Later that night, I found him in his townhouse study, sitting by the window with a glass of untouched whiskey. The city lights flickered against the rain-streaked glass. For the first time, he looked his age, tired, human, and utterly alone. I don't know what comes next, he said. They'll drag this through the press. Every part of my life, my patience, my reputation, it'll all be dissected. Then tell the truth, I said, all of it. He shook his head. They'll use you against me. You've already been through enough. I can handle it. He looked up, eyes dark. You shouldn't have to. Something inside me broke at the quiet in his voice. I walked closer, standing beside the piano that had once been silent between us. You told me once emotions were dangerous, I said, but maybe it's the lack of them that ruins us. He stared at me for a long moment, then set the glass down. I made one mistake, Maya, he said, voice low. I thought pretending would protect us. And now his jaw tightened. Now I realized the pretense was the most dangerous part. The air between us thickened heavy with everything unspoken. The rain outside softened to a whisper. He took a step forward, hesitated, then reached for my hand. His touch was tentative, almost reverent, as if he wasn't sure he had the right anymore. I didn't pull away. He exhaled, his voice barely audible. I'm sorry. For what? For every rule that kept me from feeling this sooner. Before I could answer, Clara appeared at the doorway, her face pale. You need to see this. She turned her phone toward us. On the screen was a breaking news alert, photos of Adrian leaving the hospital, the words "fake marriage scandal" deepens flashing beneath his image. My stomach dropped. They leaked it. Clara nodded. Someone inside the board sent the story out. They're saying you both falsified the marriage to manipulate funding. Adrian swore under his breath. Linton. What do we do now? I asked. He looked at me, his expression raw, unguarded. We stop hiding, he said. Tomorrow I'll go public. The truth about the contract, about Linton, about everything. That'll destroy your career. He gave a faint, tired smile. Then maybe it's time to stop living for a career. The room went quiet except for the sound of rain against the window. He still held my hand, his thumb brushing lightly against my skin. Whatever happens next, I whispered, you're not doing it alone. He looked at me like he didn't quite believe it, then nodded slowly. Then we'll face it together. Outside, thunder rolled once more across the city, distant but steady. It sounded less like an ending and more like the first tremor of change. The press conference was scheduled for 9, but by 8 the lobby of St. John's was already packed. Reporters filled every corner, cameras perched on tripods, microphones angled like weapons. Outside, the gray sky hung heavy with the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. I stood at the back of the hall, my palms slick with sweat, watching as Adrian adjusted his tie in front of the podium. He looked calm, but I could see the tension in the tight line of his jaw. Clara whispered something to him, handed over a stack of documents, then slipped away to the edge of the crowd. When he finally stepped forward, the room fell silent. Thank you for coming, he began, his voice steady. For weeks there have been questions about my position, my foundation, and my marriage. Today I intend to answer them. The first flash went off. Then another. It's true, he said simply. My marriage to Maya Rivers began as an arrangement, a private contract. The board required stability, and I made a decision I thought would preserve my mother's legacy. The air in the room thickened. I take full responsibility for that deception, he continued. Maya entered this arrangement to help her mother's medical treatment. She had no part in the foundation's politics. She is not to blame for any of this. The noise erupted immediately, reporters shouting, cameras, flashing voices overlapping. I took a step forward, but Clara caught my arm. Don't, she whispered. Let him finish. But I couldn't just stand there. My pulse thundered in my ears. He was taking all the blame again, shielding me the way he always did. I slipped free from Clara's hand and moved through the crowd. The room fell quiet again as I reached the stage. Adrian froze, surprise flickering across his face. That's not the whole truth, I said, my voice trembling but loud enough to carry. I agreed to this arrangement, yes, but somewhere along the way it stopped being one. The cameras flashed wildly now. Reporters leaned forward. I thought I could keep feelings out of it, I said. I thought I could pretend, but I was wrong. What we built together, what we fought through, it wasn't fake. It was real. For a moment, no one breathed. Then, a voice from the back shouted, Are you saying you're in love with him? I didn't look away from Adrian. I'm saying pretending was the mistake. A murmur swept through the room, the half disbelief, half awe. Adrian stared at me, his composure cracked for the first time. Something flickered in his eyes, relief maybe, or heartbreak. Then he turned back to the microphone. The foundation will continue its mission, he said quietly. But today I'm resigning as chairman. It's time to rebuild this organization, not as an image, but as something honest. The noise that followed was chaos, questions, flashes, people rushing forward, but all I saw was him turning toward me, his expression softer than I'd ever seen. "You shouldn't have done that," he whispered. "Maybe not," I said. "But I needed to." He exhaled, almost laughing, but his eyes glistened with something unspoken. "You just made us both front-page news. I think that ship sailed a long time ago." Outside, the cold air hit like a wave when we stepped through the hospital doors. Reporters still followed, shouting questions, but Adrian took my hand and kept walking until we reached the edge of the parking lot. The crowd faded behind us, replaced by the low hum of city traffic. "You'll lose everything," I said quietly. "Maybe," he replied, "but maybe I'll finally have something real." We stood there in silence, the wind tugging at my hair, the clouds shifting above us. For the first time in weeks, his face looked free, tired but free. He turned toward me. I meant what I said in there, about taking responsibility, and I meant what I said. I answered, "I'm not letting you carry this alone." His hand tightened around mine. The sound of distant sirens drifted through the air, but for that moment it felt like the world had slowed down. Later that night, the hospital corridors were quiet again. I found him sitting in the courtyard under the maple tree, the same spot where we'd shared coffee in silence once before. The wind rustled the leaves, carrying the faint smell of rain. "You should be home," he said without looking up. I couldn't sleep. He gave a faint smile. "Me neither." I sat beside him, pulling my coat tighter. "What happens now? I step away from the foundation. The board will replace me by next month. The media will move on eventually. And you?" He looked down at his hands. "I don't know. I built my whole life around control. Now I'm learning what it's like to lose it." "Maybe that's the point," I said softly. "Maybe you were never supposed to control everything." He turned to me, then, eyes tired but filled with something gentler. "You make it sound easy. It's not. But it's worth it." The silence that followed was heavy but not uncomfortable. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a folded napkin, creased and worn. It was the one I'd left on his piano weeks ago, the one that read, "No feelings involved." "Remember," he held it out to me. "You left this behind." I took it carefully. The ink had faded slightly, the words smudged. Guess I wasn't very good at following rules. He smiled faintly. Neither was I. For a long time we just sat there under the pale glow of the courtyard lights, the noise of the city, a distant heartbeat around us. It wasn't a happy ending, not yet, but for the first time it felt like a beginning. As I walked home later, the streets were still slick from the rain. My reflection followed me in every puddle. Older, steadier, not the same woman who'd once signed a contract to save her mother. Somewhere behind me the hospital lights glowed against the night, and I thought about the rule that had started it all. It wasn't the rule that had changed everything, it was breaking it. 6 months later, Boston had changed. Or maybe it was me who had. The winter frost had melted into a soft, reluctant spring, and the city seemed to breathe easier. The scandal that once dominated every headline had faded into the background, replaced by newer stories, newer names. Life, as it always did, moved on. I walked through the polished glass doors of the new pediatric center, the air inside crisp with the smell of fresh paint and flowers. The sign above the entrance read, "The Cole Rivers Foundation for Children's Neurological Care." I still wasn't used to seeing my name beside his. The grand opening had drawn a crowd, doctors, patients, donors, families. As I stepped onto the stage, the flash of cameras barely registered anymore. I spoke slowly, clearly about hope, about compassion, about second chances. My words didn't tremble like they once would have. When I cut the ribbon, applause filled the courtyard. Dozens of white balloons rose into the air, floating toward the pale blue sky. For a moment, I stood there, watching them drift higher until they disappeared. The sound of children laughing carried through the open doors, and something inside me softened. After the ceremony, I slipped away from the crowd and walked through the new wing. The walls were painted soft green, sunlight spilling through the wide windows. A mural of clouds and kites stretched across the hallway. It felt alive, full of the very thing this hospital had lacked for so long, warmth. On my desk in the small administrative office sat a brown paper package. No label, no sender. I knew before I opened it. Inside was a single photograph, the one from the press conference where Adrian and I had stood side by side. In this version, someone had erased the harsh headlines, Below the image in his familiar handwriting were 4 words, no feelings involved, right? I laughed softly, blinking away the sting in my eyes. The knock came just as I set the photo down. When I looked up, he was standing there in the doorway. Adrian. He looked different, no lab coat, no tie, just a dark jacket and the faintest trace of a smile. There were lines around his eyes now from time and maybe from learning how to live without the armor. "You found the place," he said. "I helped build it," I answered, smiling back. "You didn't think I'd miss the opening, did you?" He stepped inside, his gaze sweeping the room. "You did more than build it. You saved it. You gave it a reason to exist," I said quietly. He walked to the window, his reflection catching the sunlight. "I've been in Geneva for a while, teaching consulting. It's quiet there. Too quiet. Maybe you needed that," I said. "Maybe," he admitted, then turned to me. "But quiet isn't peace. Sometimes peace is knowing what not to run from." My heart skipped once, the same way it always did when he spoke like that, honest, stripped of every pretense. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I have something for you." I opened it carefully. Inside was the original contract, that the same one I'd signed in his townhouse so many months ago. Across the line where our signatures once sat, a new message had been written in ink. "Let's make it real this time." I looked up. "You're terrible at subtlety." He smiled, almost shy. "Only when it matters." "Adrian." He took a step closer. "I know we've both built our lives around rules and reasons, but when you walked into that boardroom, when you stood beside me after everything fell apart, you changed what I thought love was supposed to be." My throat tightened. "Are you asking me?" "Yes," he said softly. "Not to pretend this time, not to protect an image, just to stay." For a moment the world outside seemed to disappear, the noise, the years, the hurt. There was only him. I didn't need to answer with words. I stepped forward and kissed him. It wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was steady, certain, the kind of kiss that felt like coming home. When we finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine. "No more pretending," he whispered. "No more rules," I said. Outside, the sound of laughter from the children's wing echoed through the corridor. It felt like a blessing, like the universe nodding in quiet approval. We stood there for a while, watching the sunlight spill across the polished floor. The hospital, the city, our lives, they had all been rebuilt from the ruins of a lie. But what we had now wasn't perfect. It was real, and that was enough. Months later, the world would move on again, as it always does. But somewhere inside that hospital, between the laughter of children and the hum of monitors, our story would stay woven into the walls, the legacy of what it meant to begin again. And if anyone ever asked how it all started, I'd probably just smile and say, with one impossible rule. Because sometimes the things that are meant to break you are the ones that save you instead. If this story touched you, tell me what part hit closest to your heart. Don't forget to subscribe, stay with our channel, and share your thoughts below, because every story like love deserves to be heard until the very last word.